So, you want to throw some fireballs around and be super strong with little smart? Well, do I have the build for you. This build takes advantage of the Brutus Lead Sprinkler uniques, which have recently been buffed to add 2 to 4 fire damage to attacks per 10 strength. Dual wielding these weapons will provide us with double the added damage, bringing it to 4 to 8 fire damage added to attacks per 10 strength. So basically, we want to be stacking as much strength as possible to get as much base damage as possible. I will first say that this build is a bit more for the intermediate or advanced player, as it requires the use of Vol Pact as well as getting in the mob's faces to leech life and stay alive on a life-based build, which can be inconvenient and troublesome to many. Pros of this build include that it is less than an Exalt to get going, which is very inexpensive. It has very high damage, insane life leech and survivability due to the Berserker and Vol Pact combo, smooth gameplay and clear speed, can do all map mods except for Elemental Reflect. It can also do Guardians, as long as they aren't rolled for insane damage that can one-shot you. I haven't tried Shaper yet, but I'm sure it has the damage for it. And it's in-your-face melee action. Cons of this build include, it's in-your-face melee action, so unfortunately you will have to be up in monsters' faces taking a lot of damage and dealing a lot of damage. Life-based Vol Pact, so it can be uncomfortable to many without the life regen, especially if you're doing Labyrinth traps. As we are life-based, we are still prone to one-shot damage and chaos damage. Now there are a couple of choices to be made for this build's class and Ascendancy, but for this video I will keep it simple and short and tell you the best two. In the forum post that I will link in the description, we'll go through all the pros and cons of the other optional classes and Ascendancies and explain a bit more in depth why I did not choose them. Now, for this build I wanted to be able to take this to endgame scenarios, facing Guardians and to eventually face Shaper. After looking at all these classes, I chose the Marauder Berserker. This was because not only do we get a massive 40% more multiplier to all damage sources, but we can also abuse the 100% of damage leached with Vol Pact. This means after every hit, our life will be instantly replenished, so we will only be defenseless to complete one-shot damage. It also means that we can survive Elemental Reflect auras on rare monsters, but we'll still have to avoid doing Elemental Reflect maps. The Marauder also starts with and has the best access to strength nodes in the tree. Now overall, the other classes did not offer much in the way of defenses with the same offensive gain that could be beat running this Berserker combination, especially in the high and fast damage output of endgame scenarios. The next closest competitor would be the Ranger Raider class. Now the Marauder gets a straight 40% more damage multiplier, while the Raider gets a total of 32% more damage multiplier while at max frenzy charges. The Berserker gets a total of 62% increased attack speed, while the Raider gets a total of 66% increased attack speed. For both builds, we will have to take Vol Pact to survive, and the 100% damage leech that the Berserker can get is much stronger than the 2% leech that the Raider can get from the tree. The 50% damage from the Berserker and the 40% elemental damage from the Raider are mostly the same and insignificant due to the more damage multipliers they already have. Luckily, the Ranger Raider class can be played with the same passive tree, just picking up the leech near the duelist area. So if you'd like to try this option instead, feel free to try it out. Now to make sure that we do as much damage as possible to delete enemies and stay alive, we just have to stack massive amounts of strength, fire penetration, and many more multipliers as we can possibly get. Now here are the passive trees for leveling the build and the final tree that you will get around level 90. Now we want to be pathing to a couple of these keystones first, while alternating between defensive and offensive nodes respectively. For keystones, we're going to be picking up the following. Unwavering Stance. We of course have to get this so we're never stunned. This would be bad since we have to attack to stay alive. We pick up Elemental Overload from the tree as we get a 40% more elemental damage multiplier for 8 seconds after we land a critical strike. This is very strong since we are not scaling critical strike chance or multi, and have pure fire damage. Since we have a decent local critical strike chance on our weapons and we attack so fast, we will proc this buff very often. In the bottom section of the tree, we will grab Point Blank. This provides our Molten Strike Balls 50% more damage multiplier in the beginning of their travel. Since we don't scale too much area and Molten Strike Balls generally don't travel their full distance, we will always be benefiting from the 50% more multiplier. We of course have to get Vol Pact since we are going to make use of our 100% damage leached as life. This means we will basically instantly leech to full life from any damage we deal. We of course will want to get this later in the game, closer to mapping. We do not get Iron Grip as we do not really have or scale any base physical damage. All of our damage is fire damage, and if we do get Azov's Blood Amulet, then we will half any of the physical damage we have due to Avatar of Fire. We also do not get Resolute Technique as we need to perform some critical strikes to proc Elemental Overload. Our Ascendancy progression is Pain Reaver, Crave the Slaughter, Aspect of Carnage, and finally Cloaked in Savagery. Leveling this build is incredibly easy and smooth since we get a lot of base life, and we can use our endgame weapons very early, and we don't have to respec our tree at any point. We also do not have to worry about buying any expensive uniques to get the build working. If you have access to some currency already, you can pick up many useful uniques to level with that are very cheap. Here they are listed in order of the level available to equip, as well as some that we will actually be using all the way to endgame. For every build I level, I always love to use a Gold Rim Helmet for the plus to all elemental resistances, and the Wanderlust for the movement speed and freeze immunity. For offense, I wore a Meginord's Girdle and simply dual-wielded the Screaming Eagles at level 6 until level 28, when I could dual-wield the Brutus Lead Sprinklers. These weapons are great for speed leveling due to their movement speed modifiers. If you do not have access to any of these uniques, you can simply use any other gear you find, using a decent two-handed rare axe, mace, or staff until you can get the Sprinklers. Now we get the Molten Strike skill at level 1, but I do not like using Molten Strike until we get at least one Wildfire jewel socketed in our tree, since we don't get much area coverage with the original 3 balls for Molten Strike. We will instead start by using Ground Slam skill until level 12, when we can get the Sunder skill. If you are using the Screaming Eagles, you can instead use Cleave from level 6 to 12. Once we have the Sunder skill, we will be using this to cruise through leveling until we can socket a Wildfire gem and get the Sprinklers. You can really use Sunder for as long as you like while leveling, as it works really well. It will fall off towards the end of leveling against big single enemy targets, such as bosses, where Molten Strike will shine. At level 49, we can equip the Elbron's Warpath boots, which will be our endgame boots due to the percentage scaling to strength they provide. At level 28, we equip the Brutus Lead Sprinklers and get a Wildfire jewel socketed. Here you can either swap to a Molten Strike or continue with Sunder, whatever feels more comfortable. At level 35, we can equip Meginord's Vise gloves for the powerful 100 strength they provide, and will remain our gloves through the endgame. These 3 uniques here will be used for the rest of the build. From here it is just filling out the rest of the passive tree, following the provided trees roughly, and getting gear with strength, life, and resistances on it. For our main damage setup, we will be using Molten Strike, which will be socketed in our body armor, and will be supported by the following gems. We can also swap in Concentrated Effect for Elemental Focus on tough bosses. This will cause more overlap of our Molten Strike balls, but will not scale our initial melee hits. For our Totem support, we will be socketing this in our helmet, and it will be supported by the following support gems. For auras, we will have the following linked in our boots: Arctic Armor, Herald of Ash, Blasphemy, and Flammability. Arctic Armor will give us decent defense, making us take less fire damage and less physical damage. Herald of Ash won't give us much in terms of physical damage conversion to fire, but will give us a lot of ignites due to overkill damage. Our Blasphemy Flammability will reduce enemies' resistances even further, making us do even more damage. For our mobility links, we will be socketing this in our weapon and be using Leap Slam with Fortify and faster attacks. For our defensive links, we will be socketing these in our gloves. We will have cast when damage taken with the Mortal Call, increased duration, and an Ice Golem. Ice Golem is nice because it fills out some crit and accuracy for our build, allowing us to hit more often and to get more Elemental Overload procs. And finally, for some assorted gems we will be putting inside of our other weapon. We will have a Vol Lightning Trap, Blood Rage, and Rallying Cry. Vol Lightning Trap is great for shocking on bosses, and Rallying Cry gives us extra damage, and if you feel like using a Blood Rage with Vol Pact, we can get even more damage with Frenzy charges and increased attack speed. Aside from the uniques that we're already wearing from leveling, we will want to try and shoot for getting at least one last unique. This is Azoth's Blood Amulet. This will provide us with 10% increased life and strength, as well as 10% fire penetration. This item is very strong and currently quite expensive, but fear not, it is not required. I was able to do Guardians and endgame maps without it. For the rest of our gear slots, we will focus on rare strength-based gear, so armor or evasion and armor-based gear. This is because we can more easily get the colors we want on those sockets, and we don't much care for stacking any implicit primary defense. We will take the following priorities on gear affixes. We will follow the following offensive affix priority. Now we want to try and get strength on as many items as possible, and percentage elemental damage with weapons on as many items as possible. And we will only really need 1 or 2 good accuracy rolls on items. We will want to follow the following defensive affix priority. Here we of course want to get maximum life, as well as elemental resistances. And if you do come across percentage or flat increased armor and evasion, you can go ahead and get that. For jewels, we will first want to socket the 2 Wildfire unique jewels into the jewel sockets to the immediate left and to the top of the Marauder start as soon as we can. We will also want to socket an Inertia unique jewel in the socket above the Ranger. We will have space for 2 rare jewels after we have socketed these unique jewels. We will want the following priorities for rare jewels. Here, of course, we want to get more strength, a percentage increased life, and any sort of damage we can get to fire, and maybe elemental resistances if we need to fill those out. For flasks, we have a couple different options for what we can use. We will want to make sure that we have at least 1 life flask. I use an eternal life flask for quick health recovery. For defensive flasks, we will want to make use of a basalt flask for the physical mitigation. For offensive flasks, we will want to make use of a silver flask for the onslaught effect, smoothing out our attack speed and giving us some movement speed. Depending on your gearing, you will also want to use the Wise Oak Bismuth flask. This flask provides 20% elemental penetration for your highest uncapped elemental resistance. This is the percentage number in the parentheses on your character sheet. So if your highest uncapped elemental resistance is fire, you will gain 20% fire penetration, which is insanely strong for just a flask buff. Now if you don't have a Zoph's Blood Amulet, you can make use of the Adziri Promise Flask. You cannot use this flask if you have the Zoph Amulet, as the amulet does provide Avatar of Fire, which will not let you deal any damage other than fire damage, and chaos damage is not converted with Avatar of Fire. In its spot, you can either use a Stibnite Flask or a Quicksilver Flask for more mobility. Here are the offensive stats for the build, unbuffed. Here are the offensive stats for the build, buffed with Ellie Overload, Frenzies, Savage Hits, and Flasks. Here are the defensive stats for the build. The playstyle is very simple and fitting nature for the Berserker. First, we will want to enable Blood Rage. You are not required to use Blood Rage gem, as we have no life regen due to Volpact, making your life quickly drain if you are not leeching, but I use it anyways. It nets us a gain of 26% increased attack speed and 12% more damage. I have mine set up on a weapon, so I can quickly weapon swap to cancel the Blood Rage buff if required. After we have Blood Rage going, we can simply keep up Fortify by leap slamming from pack to pack, keep our flasks up at all times, and unleash Fiery Rain of Molten Hot Balls. We are very safe to most damage since we are always replenishing our health instantly, and are only really in danger of excess damage that can one-shot our entire life pool before we are leeching or while we are leeching. This can and will happen in high tier maps, tier 16s and such. However, I only died a few times after getting to maps, dying to simple mistakes or overextending myself into ridiculous damage maps. Overall, I found this build very satisfying and a definite boss killer. I would recommend it to anybody that wants to get a real man mode Berserker build going. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the build guide, and I will see you in the next one, Exile.